Hello, in this video we are going to use the composition to determine whether two functions are inverses. That is our objective, and we're going to start off talking about your prior knowledge with domain and range. And if we have a function here and we want to know the domain of the inverse, we can find that just by taking the range of our outputs. So our range of our current function is -6, 3, and 7. The range of our inverse would be the domain of our current function, and that would be -8, -2, and 5. So what is composition? Composition is a mathematical process in which one function, f of x, uses the range values, or the outputs, of another function, g of x, as its domain values. Plain and simple, we're going to take the outputs of this function and we're going to go ahead and drop them into our function where we replace all of our x values. And these range values, right, are acting as the domain. This means the second function, which represents the y values, is substituted into the first function for its x values. So composition is kind of represented kind of funny in math, and you'll see those two ways here. And it says the composition of two functions, f of x and g of x, can be written here in two ways. You'll see f and then like a circle, g, close parentheses, of x. Well, this is just pronounced f of g of x. And you can kind of see that more traditionally written here. So f of g of x, okay, or f composition g of x. I will generally use this way of reading composition notation. So here is our procedure for composition of functions. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to substitute the second function into the first function, replacing all of the variables with the second function. The next thing you'll do is you will simplify your expression, and then lastly you will write your new function in standard form using composition notation. Because the inverse of a function uses the range of the function as its domain, composition can be used to verify two functions are inverses. And here's how we do that. Given two functions, f of x and g of x, the functions are inverse functions if the following two conditions are met. If f of g of x is equal to x, and if g of f of x is equal to x, then they are inverses. It's important to note that if one of the two conditions is not met, this is enough to conclude that the two functions are not inverses. And here's kind of an example of how that would look. If I have the function f of x equals 4x plus 8 and g of x equals 1/4 x minus 2, we want to see, are these functions inverses of each other? So what we can do is we can use composition notation to go ahead and see if we get x as an output. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take g of x here and I'm going to plug it into f of x. So I'm going to replace x here with my g of x function, and you can see that here Okay, so I have f of g of x written here. Now I'm going to replace in my function here. I'm going to replace in my function x. So this x gets taken out and it gets replaced with g of x. So we have, let me switch back to my pen. So we have 4 times our g of x function plus 8, which again comes from my original f of x function. So now that we've done this, we can go ahead, we can simplify. I can distribute my 4 times 1/4 x. That's just going to produce my x, and then 4 times -2 gives me a -8. My plus 8 from my previous function comes along for the ride, and then you can see here that these two pieces cancel, leaving me with just x, which is what we want. So now we're gonna flip the process. We're gonna go ahead, and now we are going to use our f of x function as our domain. So the range values of that will be our new domain. Okay, so we have g of f of x. So I'm gonna take my f of x function and I'm gonna plug it into g, and you can see that here, and you can see we have 1/4 of x. So I have 1/4 of x, which is now my g of x function, minus 2, right, which is from my g of x function, and distributing my 1/4 times 4x gives me x. 1/4 of 8 is positive 2, and my -2 from my g of x function comes along, and these functions, or these two values here, cancel. So they cancel out and we get x. So both conditions are met, right? F of g of x gives me x, and g of f of x gives me x. So therefore, f of x and g of x are inverse functions, and we have verified it. Okay, that's the end of this video on concept and the skill. Please view the next couple of videos in order to go ahead and get practice.